So today we're going to be reading the book No Talking by Andrew Clements. I would start the read aloud session by asking the students to observe the cover, noticing any details or characteristics that could help us to realize what the book is about. And then I would go into asking them what would be a prediction that they have for what this story could be about. I would have the students share their responses and give an appropriate amount of time for discussion. And then before we started reading, I would just go over a couple things that we had been working on in class. So for instance, we've been talking about theme a lot, so I would want to remind them about what a theme is, asking the students to restate what a theme is in a book, how we can find it, what it helps us to notice about the book. And then I would also want to go over summarizing, and just before I start reading, making sure all the students have their listening ears on and are ready to be able to deliver a summary of either the chapter or the entire book that we're reading. So at this point, I would begin reading the book after the appropriate amount of time we spent going over the beginning of the book and all the different traits of the book that we're going to be considering while we're reading. So the first chapter is called Zipped. Dave Packer was in the middle of his fourth hour of not talking. He was also in the middle of his social studies class on a Monday morning in the middle of November. And Layton Elementary School was in the middle of a medium-sized town in the middle of New Jersey. There was a reason Dave was in the middle of his fourth hour of not talking, but this isn't the time to tell about that. This is the time to tell what he figured out in the middle of his social studies class. Dave figured out that not talking is extra hard at school, and the reason? Teachers. Because at 11:35, Miss Overby clapped her hands and said, Class, quiet down." Then she looked at her list and said, "Dave and Lindsay, you're next." So Dave nodded at Lindsay and stood up. It was time to present the report about India. So now that we have learned a little bit about the story and that this boy, Dave, is trying not to talk, I would ask the class if they've ever experienced trying not to talk before, and have them share their stories about if it was hard or not. And then also, I would ask the class if they, what are some reasons why it would be hard not to talk in school. So the way I would ask this is I would have the students do a think, pair, share. So I would have the students pair up and tell them to talk amongst themselves with their partner about what would be hard about not being able to talk in school. After they had an appropriate amount of time to talk about that, I would then bring the class back together and have each pair share an idea about what they talked about. Then I would continue reading. But giving this report would ruin his experiment. Because Dave was trying to keep his mouth shut all day, he wanted to keep his lips zipped right up to the very end of the day, to not say one single word until the last bell rang at 3:10. And the reason Dave had decided to clam up? But it still isn't time to tell about that. This is the time to tell what he did about the report. Dave and Lindsay walked to the front of the room. Dave was supposed to begin the presentation by telling about the history of India. He looked down at his index cards, looked up at Miss Overby, looked out at the class, and he opened his mouth. But he didn't talk. He coughed. Dave coughed for about 10 seconds. Then he wiped his mouth, looked at his index cards again, looked at Miss Overby again, looked at the class again, opened his mouth again, and coughed some more. He coughed and coughed and coughed until his face was bright red and he was all bent over. Lindsay stood there feeling helpless. Dave hadn't told her about his experiment, so all he could do was watch and listen to his horrible coughing. Lindsay's opinion of Dave had never been high, and it sank lower by the second. I would then show the picture and ask the students to tell me what they noticed about the picture. I'm going to talk about how you can see that the boy Dave is coughing, and his partner, I'm assuming this would be Lindsay, is looking at him like kind of annoyed and upset about what he's doing during their presentation. Miss Overby thought she knew what was happening with Dave. She had seen this before. Kids who got so nervous that they made themselves sick rather than talk in front of the class. It surprised her because Dave wasn't shy at all, ever. In fact, none of this year's fifth graders were the least bit shy or nervous about talking, ever. But the teacher took pity and she said, "You'd better go get some water. You two can give your report later." Lindsay gave Dave a disgusted look and went back to her desk. Dave nodded at Mrs. Overby, coughed a few more times for good measure, and hurried out of the room. And with Dave out in the hall getting a drink, it's the perfect time to tell you why he was in the middle of his 4th hour of not talking and why he had decided to keep quiet in the first place. So this is the end of chapter 1. I would ask the students a couple comprehension questions. So I would ask just to make sure they understood what I was reading and were reading for meaning. So my first question would be how did Dave get out of delivering the report in class? And then I would also ask them to make a prediction about what would be happening in chapter 2. So I would ask them to predict why you think that Dave is trying not to talk. So after the students shared their predictions about chapter 2, I would continue reading chapter 2, and chapter 2 is called Gandhi. When something happens, there's usually a simple explanation. But that simple explanation is almost never the full story. Here's the simple explanation anyway. Dave had decided to stop talking for a whole day because of something he'd read in a book. See, very simple, very clear. But it's not the whole story. So here's a little more. Dave and a partner had to prepare a report on India. Not a long one, just some basic facts. Something about the history, something about the government, something about the land and the industry, something about the Indian people and their culture. 5 minutes or less. Dave's report partner was Lindsay Burgess, and neither one of them was happy about that. There were some boy-girl problems at Laketon Elementary School, but this isn't the time to tell about that. Even though Dave and Lindsay had to give their report together, they both agreed that they did not want to prepare it together. So they divided the topics in half and each worked alone. Dave was a good student, and he had found 2 books about India, and he had checked them out of the library. He hadn't read both books, not completely. He wasn't that good of a student, but he had read parts of both books. Dave thought the most interesting section in each book was the part about how India became independent, how the country broke away from England to become a free nation, sort of like the United States did. And Dave thought the most interesting person in the story of India's independence was Mahatma Gandhi. So at this point, I would stop and ask the students if they have any background knowledge on Mahatma Gandhi and to share what they've learned about him in the past. And if they didn't, I would go a little bit over Mahatma Gandhi's role in India's independence. Dave was amazed by Gandhi. This one skinny little man practically pushed the whole British Army out of India all by himself. But he didn't use weapons or violence. He fought with words and ideas. It was an incredible story, all of it true. And in one of the books, Dave read this about Gandhi. For many years, one day each week, Gandhi did not speak at all. Gandhi believed this was a way to bring order to his mind. Dave read that bit of information on Thursday afternoon, and he read it again on Sunday night as he prepared for his oral report. And it made him wonder what that would be like, to go a whole day without saying a single word. And Dave began to wonder if not talking would bring order to his mind too. So at this point, I would ask the students what they think it means by bringing order to their mind. I would ask the class to discuss this, and we would talk about some possibilities about what bringing order to Dave's mind would be like, or possibly to the students' minds, and we're connected to them. In fact, Dave wondered what that meant, to bring order to his mind. Could something as simple as not talking change the way your mind worked? Seemed like it must have been good for Gandhi, but what would it do for a regular kid in New Jersey? Would not talking make him smarter? Would he finally understand fractions? If he had more order in his mind, would he be able to look at a sentence and see which word was an adverb, instead of just guessing? And how about sports? Would someone with a more orderly mind be a better baseball player? Powerful questions. So Dave decided to zip his lip and give it a try. Was it hard for him to keep quiet? You bet, especially at first, like when he got to the bus stop, where his friends were arguing about why the Jets had lost to the Patriots. But Dave had learned quickly that by nodding and smiling, by frowning and shrugging, by shaking his head, by giving a thumbs up or a high five, or even by just putting his hands in his coat pockets and turning away, not talking was possible. And by the time he'd ridden the bus to school, Dave had gotten pretty good at fitting in without speaking up. There, that explains what's going on a little better, and it's probably enough, at least for the moment, but there's more. There's always more. And now we're back in class on Monday with Dave, who got through the rest of social studies without saying a word. When the bell rang at the end of the period, it was time for 5th grade lunch. More than 125 kids began hurrying toward the cafeteria. By the time they got there, the 5th graders were already talking like crazy, all except one. So then I would ask the comprehension question, and that's the end of chapter 2. Why did Dave decide not to talk? I want to make sure the students understand that because it's an important part of the beginning of the story. I would then ask the students to do another think, pair, share, so to talk together and to make a prediction about what they think is going to happen throughout the rest of the story. And I would give them some ideas such as, like, do they believe that Dave can make it through the whole day without talking or not? And we would discuss that. So that would be the end of chapter 2. That would be where I stopped the book for that day for the read aloud. And then we would continue reading chapter 3 during the next read aloud.